For the first time in almost 60 years, a Syrian leader has addressed the United Nations General Assembly. President Ahmed al-Sharaa told world leaders Syria is reclaiming its rightful place in the world after 6 decades of dictatorship that killed 1 million people and tortured hundreds of thousands. It was the president who led the rebel offensive that overthrew former leader Bashar al-Assad in December last year. Dara Conduit, welcome. So describe for us first off what Syria had descended to under Bashar al-Assad and then the group that Ahmed al-Sharaa was involved with in the overthrow.
Yes, I mean, Syria under Bashar al-Assad was a broken country. It was one of the most authoritarian states in the world. There was no freedom, there was no hope. And Bashar al-Assad and his henchmen ran one of the cruelest regimes on earth. And in the last 13 years of his rule, he faced a popular uprising in which he spared no effort or no expense to quell. So hundreds of thousands of people, if not more, were tortured in his prison systems. More than 100,000 people are still missing, having disappeared in custody. And his supporters used the catch cry, Assad or we burn the country, and burn the country he did. So on the eve of the regime's overthrow last December, Syria was a country in ruin. It had, the economy had been decimated, critical infrastructure had been demolished, power, electricity, water, all of these things have been reduced to almost nothing. And the people had been torn apart by the violence and sectarianism that was promulgated by that regime. Ahmed al-Sharaa was the leader of the group that eventually overthrew this regime. So he was the leader of a group that was eventually named Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is a group that became involved in Syria in the first year of that uprising. It was initially linked to al-Qaeda in Iraq, the Islamic State group and others, but it broke off from that. And in fact became sworn enemies of this group. And it became one of the most effective groups in the uprising, not only militarily, but also in terms of developing a support base. So even though it has been associated with human rights violations, and grave incidents of violence, it also is one of the groups that managed to, develop a local constituency and develop a support base. And it was very effectively managed. So, soon, this time last year, a little bit later last year, the group, which had controlled part of Idlib province in the country's northwest, launched a surprise attack on Aleppo, which is the country's second city. And to the surprise of most of us, the regime collapsed. And over the following 2 weeks, it pushed south towards Damascus, and city after city fell. Yeah,
it all happened so quickly, didn't it? And when he emerged as the new leader, it was quite stunning to hear him talking very almost progressively about including and respecting all who hadn't committed atrocities. What was your reaction to those initial statements from Ahmed al-Sharaa?
Look, I mean, he said all of the right things, and these things weren't inconsistent with what he had been saying in previous years. So those of us who watched closely for a long time were not surprised with what he said. The problem is, Syria's in a really bad way, and rebuilding it is a momentous task for absolutely anyone. And it's complex not only because of this pain and destruction, the bad faith actors that are trying to make him fail, the old regime that wants to come back, and his opponents within. So yes, he's said all the right things, but the task ahead of him is enormous.
And to what extent has he stuck to those words in the year since?
Look, there's been a lot of criticism of him. Some of it's been fair, and some of it, in my view, is a bit unfair given the enormity of the task. I'm not sure anybody would be able to do a perfect job of what he's faced. So, in some ways, the political process is underway and it's working. There's an interim constitution, although it's raised questions about his power and whether he'll be willing to cede power. Elections are taking place in Syria next week, and they're certainly the freest and fairest that we've seen, although they're indirect elections. Foreign aid and investments coming back to the country. The government signed massive contracts for infrastructure and oil and those sorts of things. And I mean, something that I think speaks very strongly about what the government is trying to do is it has filled its ministries with the best and brightest of Syrians. All of the brilliant Syrians who are involved in oppositions, who are trained internationally, forced outside of Syria, have come back and are sitting in these ministries. So they've done a lot of amazing things, but there are also things that he hasn't managed well. This includes flare-ups of violence, including in the country's west earlier this year, when a large number of Alawite civilians were killed in retribution killings. And some of those were some of his former supporters and members of his group. And so he's been trying very, very hard to walk a fine line between those people and the need for justice. And I don't think he has gotten that right. And there are also other outstanding issues, such as a lack of progress on transitional justice, which is an enormous problem for Syria, but one that he has not really gotten off the ground yet.
Yeah. And so what did you make of his speech to the UN, and how do you believe the international community should approach him now?
I think Syria can only succeed if the international community supports it. You know, this new government is facing enormous headwinds, and it would not take much to make it fail. So I think it's actually incumbent on the international community to support this government and the Syrian people to create the country that they so richly deserved after 5 decades of tyranny.
So, yeah, so from what you're saying, he does seem to be the right person for the job at this moment in a very difficult situation.
I think he's the only person for the job at this moment in time. I mean, it is hoped that in the future he will, there will be, elections and all of these sorts of things. This is not a new king for Syria, all of us hope. But right now, I'm not sure that there is anybody else in the world that's capable of doing this job.
Yeah, okay. Dara Conduit, thanks so much for talking to us from Melbourne.
Thanks for your time.